the change that we made to the 125% of the seated load as opposed to just a fully seated load is partly driven by our need to do critical track work during off-peak hours. And we can't have folks out there during rush hours on the roadbed doing the work. And there's a lot of work that goes on to maintain a railroad. But on the other hand, when you put people out on the roadbed to do work, what do we have to do? Slow the trains down. And we have become much more stringent in worker safety rules over the past 15 years, whereby trains now, not just on the track that's being worked on, but on the track next to the track being worked on, must slow down and go slowly past the work zone. It's ever since the G train disaster, this was. Yes, sir.
I heard a while back that Columbus Circle had the highest entry volume in the whole system. Is that still the case?
I've never heard that Columbus Circle was number one. It teeters back and forth between Grand Central and Times Square, usually Times Square. Columbus Circle is up there, usually in the top 10 or 12. It's a very busy station, getting all the busier
turnstile sets that they were talking about. Individual set of turnstiles.
There might be a single entry because there are relatively fewer entries at Columbus Circle compared to a Times Square and Grand Central.
Point, yeah.
But the complex.
I think I have actually heard that per turnstile. It's
because there's fewer
the
turnstiles.
highest.
Right. It also, Columbus Circle has, generally speaking, is a much better layout because they have wide open mezzanines. So, in any case, getting back to the issue of the off-peak guideline, we simply cannot run as many trains to meet that fully seated load off-peak guideline that we used to have and still get work done, the critical work to maintain the railroad and to do the major capital investments. And so that was one reason we changed the guideline. The other thing that came with that change is that we recognize that sometimes we can't even meet the 125% of the seated load on weekends with the reductions in service we have to do to accommodate major capital work. And that's one of these demand-supply balances. You need to do that work to meet the demand during the rush hour. But sometimes when that work happens, you cannot adequately meet the demand during the off-peak hours. There's a push-pull that is constantly going on. And having to slow down past work zones is absolutely critical for the safety of our workers, but it also does affect the number of trains we can run. That's why, for instance, I mentioned the Queens Boulevard line earlier, where we thin out service on weekends for E, F, and R service when we're doing all this work. That's why we're doing it, because as we're doing the signal work as well as track work, the trains have to go very slowly past those work zones, and the signal system just can't handle it when the trains are going much slower than the signal system assumes they go. You know, when a train's going 40 miles an hour during rush hours, gets over the signals blocks much more quickly than when it's crawling at 10 miles an hour during the work zone. And so we just lose capacity that way. And that gets into the other point that Ellen was making, which is there is also this balance between what we want to be able to do per the guidelines and what we can do from a practical train operation standpoint. And there are a number of factors that go into that. One of the ones is one that was mentioned earlier. I think you mentioned it, where say the A train has to share tracks with the D train. Every time two routes meet and have to share tracks, we need to schedule it so that there's an adequate amount of time between the trains. So there is oftentimes just a capacity loss. We generally, our rule of thumb, have a 2-minute spacing between trains at a minimum, if the signal system can handle it. At a few very robustly signaled sections of the railroad, we can even schedule trains 90 seconds apart. And there are about 2 of those left on the railroad that we can do that. And that's just for the merging points.
Is it CBTC going to help you with that?
Moving to CBTC will definitely help us with that. We will be able to run trains more closely together because CBTC doesn't have fixed blocks. It doesn't have these same factors. Yes, sir, you had a question?
Talking about the 2 different trains, the Uptown A train approaching Columbus Circle, almost 99% of the time, it pauses for a while. Sometimes there's no announcement, or there's an announcement saying there's traffic ahead.
Right.
And I'm sure it's because the D train is arriving just ahead of it. It seems to me that there could be some tweaking of schedules so that that doesn't happen.
You do all the
so
tweaks you want.
predictably every single
If
time.
the train is delayed because of passengers holding the doors, if the train is delayed because of
No.
a sick passenger, if the train is delayed because of other things, all the signaling in the world is not going to help.
It's so predictable that I'm sure it's because the D train is arriving just ahead of the
Yeah.
A train.
Yeah.
I'm coming down on the A. I've waited 15 minutes for an A. The platform at 125th is packed with people waiting for D. Where's the train that supposedly is congested ahead of us?
I can't give you a specific answer.
Okay,
Something
because
like that, but
it's very
I mean,
perplexing
it-
to us, particularly when you're sitting between, 168 and 145 for 10 minutes. Nothing's, and it's traffic ahead. Could they define that a little better when they make an announcement? There's a ghost?
The crew may not know exactly what the traffic is ahead. I mean, it's,
This is a red signal.
they're seeing a red signal and they're stopped. All I can say is we do try in our schedules to provide adequate spacing between the trains. And yes, sometimes they're delayed. Don't forget, a lot of times trains are not delayed, and when they're not delayed, they will go through there. Columbus Circle, which you were discussing earlier, this has been the subject of studies. I've seen studies going back to the 1960s that basically say that having that kind of a arrangement where basically everything has to merge with everybody is a capacity loser.
Actually, what Ken was talking about, he didn't take into account that there could be a B holding up a D, waiting for the
Exactly.
C to leave the station.
Right,
It could be
exactly.
a local and or express track issue.
I've seen proposals going way back saying that if you kept A's and C's and B's and D's completely separate at Columbus Circle, you could gain more capacity and more reliability, but that's not what the market wants.
Right.
The market wants expresses and locals to both car owners.
Right.
So we do try to do it better. CBTC is definitely going to help with something like that because it would be able to coordinate the service a lot more and have the trains a lot closer together. But CBTC on that segment is not for
And
many
also
decades.
going northbound, we have brake time signals that slow the trains down coming into the station.
Right.
Coming down brakes, and there are brake time signals that slow the train, so the trains don't come in at a high rate.
And we do take those signals into account in the
The
schedule.
switches are restricted like 10 miles an hour.
But what you're talking about are all these issues of operational feasibility. Why don't we run more 4 and 5 trains during the rush hour? Ellen was referring to how crowded and
The
unreliable.
door holdings gotta slow down the runtime.
Door holding.
So
Well-
that over the last 5 years, the increase in ridership, have you seen a difference in runtime?
Well, this is actually kind of an interesting
No,
thing.
but a big increase in broken doors.
The increase in ridership that we are seeing is mostly during the shoulders and off-peak hours, much less so during rush hours on a line like the 4 and 5, because it already is saturated. We are working very closely with our colleagues in rapid transit operations to come up with a robust platform controller program. I think we probably have talked about it in previous meetings. They're helping in the morning rush hour. The statistics I'm seeing are showing an uptick in performance in the morning rush hour when we have a lot of controllers out there. We don't have people on the platform as much in the afternoon rush hour, and that's actually where we're seeing more problems on this corridor now. But ultimately, the constraint on that corridor has to do with the signal system itself and its assumptions as to how long trains would be in stations and what the capacity is. And you can't add more trains at the moment. When we replace the signals in 20XX, yes, we would be able to run more trains on the Lexington Avenue line, but that is not for many, many years. And in fact, it is the saturation of Lexington Avenue line that justified the Second Avenue subway, in part.
That should
You know, coming down, I was very surprised last night. I was going uptown. I'm sorry, coming back down. And 96th Street was like 72nd used to be.
96th on which line?
96th, transferring from the 1 to the 3.
Okay.
Literally, I was afraid I was gonna get pushed up.
Okay, 96th Street, at the moment, we are doing a major switch repair job. And as a consequence, we've had to reroute some 3 trains to 137th Street on the 1 line, which means there's a lot less service on the 2 and 3 north of 96th Street. And that's probably affecting it. That's going to go on for the next 5 or 6 weeks. So that's a short term.
96 for platforms,
This represents, by the
Certainly didn't feel
way,
like it
That's amazing.
yesterday.
this-
And it really did feel like old 72nd Street,
Right.
when I used to live
Right.
at 72nd and Broadway. I mean, I was afraid to
Keep
get
on
off.
the question, you have a chance.
Here's a question, honey.
well, hey, there's just going back to that represents the kind of supplement schedules that we write, and we have to write supplements for rush hours for that work. Yes, what's your question, please?
Chris?
My question, this is Chris Ryan from Brooklyn. My question, I have a couple questions. Regarding what Edith said before about the A train, and I'm actually on the A a lot, because my office is at Euclid Avenue. It's amazing that the C train moves a little more faster than the A, because I started at Euclid, and I actually get all the way up to 42nd Street, and I still don't see an A express. This doesn't happen one day. It happens almost
Every night.
it happens almost every time, and then with express is because the A train is called the mysterious A train. Even if you're at Far Rockaway or Lefferts Boulevard, where is the A train? People sometimes, I have to wait sometimes.
Well,
20 to 20
At Nostrand Avenue, it's on a different level.
Well, no, like a Penn Station. I mean, I'm, you know, we're on the platform.
The platform, but here's the question, if there's a delay, at least we can have a little announcement saying, ladies and gentlemen,
Right.
at this time, we are experiencing delays on our A train. The other lines actually do that. They do make announcements saying, ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing delays at this time. And they do tell you to say like there is a connection turn like Coney Island, or if you're in Flatbush, they'll tell you to use the next, use another train. Like if the 2's not running, they'll say take the 5 train. If you're at Coney Island, if say the D train is out, they will tell you use the S, the N,
Chris,
the Q.
he's gonna answer you, Chris.
Chris? What?
There are a couple issues here. One is on the A and C lines in Brooklyn, they're among the few stations left in the system where we don't actually have public address systems. So we can't make those announcements.
Penn Station?
But at Penn Station, we ought to be able to make announcements.
There's never an announcement.
We have a dedicated announcer program. I don't know if that's part of the Penn Station program, and that's something that I think we could obviously.
And the only
look into.
announcement you hear is there's a local going up. There's a local going up. You never hear an explanation for why there are no uptown aids. And no, it doesn't really work. I have no choice. I'm going above 168.
Right, so you're gonna wait for the
Right.
train.
Uh, One more.
Sure.
Is it, so track speeds. When you're on the 2 or the 3 and you're coming down, like you can really get some decent track speed. But then, so you leave 14th Street. When you get to Houston, there's a big braking and the signaling all goes red, and the speed you can go going into Chambers Street is dramatically different, even though But it's not very
Okay,
big.
okay, we're getting a little far afield from scheduling,
Oh.
but I will explain this.
Sorry. Well, I thought
This
signals have something.
this has absolutely everything to do with the signal system. Signal systems exist for one reason, and that is safety. That's why you have signals on the railroad. Safety is defined in many different ways. Safety can be defined as safe train separation, so the signals keep the trains far apart, far enough apart to be safe. Safety also can be defined as preventing overspeed situations where a train could potentially derail. And in the case that Ellen mentions, which is the 2 and 3 trains entering Chambers Street, you have a combination of 3 things that require the signal systems to slow the trains down. There's a bit of a downgrade, and when trains are moving down a grade, because there's very little friction on the wheels, they can really accelerate very quickly.
Gravity.
Gravity is a very powerful force. There are curves there, and you can't go too fast around certain curves, both for the comfort of your customers, but literally, if you go too fast around certain curves, the train could derail. Then finally, we have a set of switches, we call it interlocking, which is immediately north of the Chambers Street station. Those switches have some pretty tight track geometry on them as well, and you want to control your speed going over those particular sets of switches. So you add those 3 things together, and the signal system is set to slow the train down starting at Houston Street.
Actually, it's as you enter Franklin Street.
Franklin is where the real
Today was
slowdown
Houston,
is.
but Franklin.
But it we'll hit it up.
And certainly since all trains stop at Chambers, it's gonna slow down.
And by the way, the
Chambers.
same thing's happening in the opposite direction, northbound, entering
Right,
14th
yes,
Street.
yeah.
And you have a switch north of Chambers, so some trains may have to,
But I hadn't, that
But
there are
it's-
3
it
things
is-
that go together that create the track speed
And
stuff.
I mean, our signal engineers analyze these things very carefully, and that is their determination of how fast the trains can go there, and it's built into our timetables.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yes,
I have a question. You talk about the maximum headway. What about the minimum headway at some of these off-peak hours? Are you increasing some of that?
Oh, yes. These days, even though our maximum headway is 10 minutes middays, on many of our lines, we are running much more frequent service than that. So the L line, we're running 4-minute headways in the middle of the day, which in any other city would be considered a rush hour headway.
The 4s and 5.
The 4 and the 5 combined are in a 4-minute headway. Middays, the 2 and the 3 are at 4-minute headway. The 1 and the 6 are on 5-minute headways. The 7 is on a 4 to 5-minute headway. So we're running a lot of off-peak service.
Now, I was more
What is
interested in
the
the
E or
weekday.
R?
I was
The
more interested
A-
in the weekday evening.
All right, I'll ask, I have 2 parallel questions.
Go ahead.
What was your, I didn't hear.
The weekday evening on the one, on the 6, for instance.
It's probably 6 to 8 minutes before it moves down to the 20-minute headway overnight. It's a very, very busy line.
I thought it could be using more passenger.
But again, at some point, you need to have the provision for the work. So let me go back to the concept of work. Weekday middays, most of the work that's going on the railroad is going to be outdoors, because you can't work per our safety rules on outdoor segments overnight. Also, a lot of those segments will disturb the neighbors. Doesn't stop city DOT from doing work overnight.
Or construction.
certain lighting would be
But-
necessary.
But even with certain lighting, there are safety factors on an open elevated structure. The shadows would be too great, so we just don't work overnight. So a lot of the work goes on in the periphery of the system in the middle of the day. That means that evenings and overnights is when we do the work in the underground portions of the system. So starting around 9 o'clock at night in the evening, we have to start thinning out the service, even to below what we think should be based on the guidelines, because we have to do maintenance, because the maintenance starts to go out around 9 in the evening. Now, you had a question.
What, I just said the headway on Monday.
The A train, the base headway in the middle of the day is 8 minutes, scheduled base headway. which then, or 7.5 minutes to come up, combined to 15 minutes on the two branches out the other. That's the schedule. The A, as you know, is a very difficult line to run. It's the longest line of the system. It has the branches. It has that movable bridge in Jamaica, which is the bane of our existence, because it have one opening at 10 in the morning, and it really
Jamaica
has
Bay.
ramifications over Jamaica Bay, ramifications for
And those
service
boats
for
are
hours.
always real, when we were watching it, the boat was like an hour and a half late coming through. And the other one is just like sitting there.
There's also the movable bridge for the one train.
The lift.
Anyway, so all this is talking about is the importance of these feasibility considerations in putting together a schedule. I'm going to get back to my presentation, if you don't mind, because there are a few things I did want to go through, and I do want to talk a little bit about the Second Avenue subway. So obviously, I mentioned the PIC schedules. We do the PICs twice a year, and that's the time where we do the major changes. The major changes in terms of things like Second Avenue subway, a new route. A major change in terms of rerouting service because of a study that's gone on, or changing the schedule because of a study that's gone on. You may remember the G line review a few years ago. That led to some schedule changes that were put in a PIC. And then we also have to do things like put into the PIC major construction projects that are going to be going on for a very long time. So you know next year we're coming up to the big change on the Bushwick Cut on the M train. So that's going to go into the spring 2017 PIC. We're also going to be doing major work on the 2 and 3 tunnel between Brooklyn and Manhattan, the Clark Street tube. That's going into the spring 2017 PIC. So we put these into the PIC to when we know that this work is going to be so disruptive and go on for so long that it just makes sense to do it for months at a time. The other thing we put into every PIC are the changes in service based on changes in ridership level, the guideline changes. And we have coming up with the fall PIC some changes on the 2 on weekends, a major increase in weekend 2 service, Saturday and Sunday. And we're talking about 30 extra trips per day. We had fallen behind and we're catching up basically there. As well as some additional evening service in the number 7 train, and we know additional services in the number 7 that will come up in further PICs in 2017. But doing these major timetable changes twice a year takes a long time. The 2 and the 7 guideline changes that are going into the fall 2016 PIC in November are based on data that we were collecting in 2015, as well as data that we collected in 2016. So we started collecting the data almost 2 years before that schedule change takes effect. We also were doing the planning for Second Avenue subway at that time, coming up with the final service plan over the course of 2015. It was about 10 months before November of 2016 that we finalized our plans for that PIC. And we went to the board to request a public hearing for the Second Avenue subway. So 10 months prior, this was in January of 2016. Just giving you just a sense of how long this takes. We actually started writing our schedules a couple weeks after we went to the board. So we went to the board for approval for the public hearing. So starting about 9.5 months, or almost a little bit beyond what it takes to bring a baby into this world, we started the baby that is the PIC in terms of writing the schedules. We had the public hearing for the Second Avenue subway 7 months before the November PIC, which, by the way, is not when the Second Avenue subway is open. We'll get to that. We went to the board with information about the guideline changes in the PIC 6.5 months before the PIC takes effect. We went to the board for approval of the Second Avenue subway service plan 5.25 months before the PIC takes effect. These are long lead times. Why is it so long? Because there is an incredibly long time to actually have the crews pick their jobs. So 5.5 months before the PIC is to take effect, we reviewed the PIC, the schedules and the work programs with the TWU for the A division only. And then after that, 4.5 months before the PIC takes effect, they started actually picking the A division schedules. A 6-week process to pick. Because to pick, they literally have to post in various crew offices around the system all of the jobs, the individual jobs. And the crews select their jobs day by day, cafeteria style, based on seniority. So the number 1 seniority train operator and the number 1 seniority conductor goes in and selects his or her job, and then it's number 2, number 3, etc. It takes 6 weeks for the A division, the IRT, to
It's
do
not
that.
with computers, it's not like, they can't
If-
be helped out there a little bit?
If we were to,
Ping pong balls,
I mean, that's-
gelato.
it is- that is an excellent question. It would require an agreement with the TWU to change the process.
Wow.
So.
Is it financial on their part that they don't change?
I don't know. All I can say is that I'm now involved in my second round of labor negotiations, giving ideas to our labor department, a labor office, ideas to change for the upcoming negotiation. And that's my number 1 thing, computerize the PIC. Because that would make things so much simpler and faster. It wouldn't be simple, you'd have to come up with something, but if CSX Railroad can do it by computer and Delta Airlines can do it by computer, heaven knows we can do it too. But right now, it takes, yeah, pretty much so. But they have far fewer people than we
Can you
do.
speak to that second?
Okay. In any case, this just gives you a sense. The B division pick, by the way, takes 10 weeks. So just the picking process alone is 16 weeks or 4 months. All right, let's. It's just a long time, and of course, you'd hate to be the person at the very bottom of the scenario list.
There aren't any cards left in that pile.
One pick on it when I was in Boulder on the IRT, I came, there was 1 job left and 5 vacation or leave spots. And I picked the number 91 out of 95 vacation leave because the last job on the road for Boulder was working places I didn't want to have to go in the midnight and leave the house. So, and I did very well.
Okay, that's good to know. But in any case, it is a very complicated, long process. By the way, the first thing they pick is their regular days off. And then they pick literally day by day by day. Some people prefer to take like Monday and Tuesday off and work on weekends. Other people like their weekends off. It all depends. Some people like jobs that have a lot of overtime built into them. Some people like jobs that are just straight 8 hours. It all depends upon their preference. And it all goes with seniority. But if you're at the bottom of that seniority, you're doing vacation relief in the midnight hours. All right, so let's talk about the Second Avenue subway a little bit. Obviously, we had to start doing ridership projections as to what sort of service we're going to need. And it's much harder to estimate your ridership, but of course, the line isn't open. And so this is where our ridership modeling comes in very, very critically. And I'm sure Judy McLean has given presentations here and talked about some stuff in her rail planning. But it's her group in the rail planning office that does this forecast. It's a MetroCard model that's calibrated to our traffic checks, and it also it takes into account econometric issues going on out there, growth in jobs, population, things like that. So we're fairly confident with it, but you still are making a projection. And the projection that we got out of the model showed that we needed, during rush hours in the peak direction on the 2nd Avenue subway, a schedule of 10 trains an hour, an average of a 6-minute headway. And that's what we are going to be providing, but it is not going to all be the Q train, even though we're calling it all the Q train. And here's a little nuance that gets back to that feasibility business I was talking about earlier on. So let's backtrack to what runs today. And what runs today to Astoria are the N and Q trains. And the Astoria terminal for the N and the Q has a maximum capacity of 15 trains an hour, or average 4-minute headway. That's all that terminal interlocking can handle. The tunnel underneath the East River that the N and the Q shares with the R has a maximum capacity of 25 trains an hour. And we schedule 25 trains an hour between the N, Q, and R trains in the rush hour, in both directions. What happens, though, is that on the other end, the Q and the N today coming up from Brooklyn are coming up at 10 trains an hour each, or rather 20 trains an hour. And the R is also coming up at 10 trains an hour. So what do? What we do today, and some of you who ride the Broadway BMT know this, is some of the trains on the N and the Q today that you would think will go to Astoria don't. They short turn today at 57th Street and go back to Brooklyn or go back to Storage. That constraint is not going away. We can run no more than 25 trains an hour through the 16th Street Tube and 15 trains an hour out of the Astoria terminal. We know from our ridership that we absolutely have to run that 50 trains an hour on the Astoria line. So when we replace the Q with the W, it still has to be a 15 train per hour schedule. So that again leads to the question, what happens to those N trains that are coming up from Brooklyn in excess of what you can send to Astoria? And the answer is, they're going to 2nd Avenue. And what we're going to do is they're going to be going up the normal N route, the Sea Beach line in Brooklyn and up the 4th Avenue line. We're going to call them Qs, but they're actually going to be on the N timetable. They're going to be crewed by N crews. But the sign heading north to 96th Street is going to be Q. And we're going to get those trains up to 96th Street.
Even while on the Sea Beach?
Even while on the Sea Beach. People are going to take what shows up. They know that. Right.
But I mean, you know,
It's just-